Welcome to the latest edition of the Mind-Gut Conversation. Today, I have the great pleasure of talking to visionary chef Dan Barber, who operates two famous restaurants in New York, the Blue Hill in Manhattan and the Blue Hill at Stone Barns in Pocantico, New York. Dan doesn't need much of an introduction, as there are a few chefs in the world who have reached such a celebrity status as him, not only as a chef, but as a pioneer and thought leader in how to create delicious, ethical, and sustainable produced dishes. Say a few words about Dan's accomplishments. In 2009, he was named one of the world's most influential people in Time magazine's annual Time 100. In 2014, he published a groundbreaking book, The Third Plate, Field Notes on the Future of Food, which was featured in the first season of Netflix Chef's Table in 2015. And he was appointed by President Obama to serve on the President's Council on Physical Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition. Most recently, I had the honor of contributing an article to the Patagonia Provisions Journal, in which Dan was also featured and wrote a piece. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So going through some of your writings and your internet presence, there seems to be something that you could characterize almost like your professional life has been one in the search of flavor, the ultimate flavor. You want to comment on that? Is that a correct characterization, or?
Yeah, I think, I'm an evangelist for flavor because, because it's rooted in pleasure and hedonism, and that's not a bad thing to be an evangelist for, but it's also a soothsayer because true flavor, which is something truly delicious, a carrot, let's say that has this jaw-dropping carrot flavor, has attached to it a process that is, I would argue, both about environmental stewardship, equitable nutrition, nutrient density. It even has attached to it a kind of politics. And the reason I say that is because if a carrot is truly delicious and not, coated, let's say, in sugar, but you take one bite of that carrot and you think you have tasted carrot times 100, that's a carrot that most definitely comes from seed that is particularly geared towards the right kind of soil and the right kind of production to produce that flavor. So it has to start with fair seed. And probably a seed that was selected with care and consciousness over many, many years or generations. And that carrot was probably grown from a local farmer, because if it was grown from a farmer that is far away, it wouldn't taste like that. So it probably got to you pretty soon after it was picked out of soil. And by the way, that soil that carrot was grown in, and it was soil, it wasn't a hydroponic carrot, because the taste, what I just described, you don't get that hydroponically. So you had to have soil that was teeming with life, was nutrified and biologically diverse and loaded with fertility, because that's where flavor comes from. And so that for sure was soil that was cared over. If it was soil that was cared over, it was probably grown from a farmer that's doing a lot of soil work on his or her farm, which means the ecological functioning of the farm is quite strong. Soil doesn't work in a vacuum. It only works where the entirety of the farm is at play. So you probably have, for example, good pollination, and you have good bird life, and you have the kinds of things that make the environment robust and strong, because that produces the kind of soil that produces the carrot we just are referring to. And I would say it has some equity attached to it, because in all likelihood, that carrot was not picked by machine, it was picked by hand. And if it was picked by hand in a local environment, not on a massive monoculture, because that wouldn't produce a carrot tasted good, then that carrot probably has attached to it some fair wages, because on a local independent situation, regional situation, you have to pay that way to attract any kind of worker. So for the most part, it's not absolute, but for the most part, that was probably picked in a way that was equitable and fair and just. And the nutrient density of that carrot, well, that had to be off the roof because, as you know, the flavonoids that are part and parcel of that's flavor. You can't get that flavor without flavonoids, and so that was packed. That was a nutrient bomb that we just tasted. It had to be. No difference between nutrient density and deliciousness. Zero. So and I say politics because that's a political carrot right there. That's a carrot that, with all of those attendant issues attached to it, becomes a prism, a light onto decisions that determine how the world is used. So actually, taste plays a very big role in how the world is used and how we might think about the future of food.
Yeah, this was a remarkable answer, which pretty much answered most of the questions that I had written down for you. So let me just add one comment that is coming from the health field and from the medical field. I've gotten really fascinated about as you know, about the gut microbiome and the role it plays in our human health. But that has also led me into looking more and more, what do we feed these microbes, and what does the food that we feed them, how does that influence them? And then how does the way that we grow this food influence what the microbes do? And so you mentioned flavonoids as one example of polyphenols. I mean, this seems to be like the magic communication molecule that connects everything from the soil microbes to the root system of the plant, to the health of the plant, and then to our own health, because these flavonoids obviously are gobbled up by our own microbes. So does that ever enter your equation? So you said a lot of positive things about the pursuing the ultimate flavor. Does human health and gut health, does that play a role for you in your decision making?
Well, in the answer I just said, and I'm glad you pointed out, I didn't include it. And it's probably, in my mind, and it sounds like in yours, maybe the most important element of this, which is, what does the food culture do with that carrot after it gets to your kitchen or your doorstep? And the exciting and to me, brilliant possibility with that carrot is to make it actually more delicious and more nutritious through craft, through culinary application. And as you know, that's what cultures and cuisines have figured out for thousands of years. Whether to preserve that carrot for the winter and give us nutrition and deliciousness for the colder months, or simply to have that carrot go a longer way for our nutrition and sustenance. That is negotiations that cultures and cuisines have figured out for a very long time and have done a brilliant job applying microbial activity to do just that. What I'm interested is what you just touched on there is if we know that these processes are critical for our nutrition and for our pleasure. Fermented carrot or a pickled carrot is one of the more delicious things imaginable. What is the correspondence between the carrot grown in the right soil, teeming with microbial life, and how that ferment activity takes place in our kitchen? This is what we're studying. And we have made great strides actually on that right before COVID, as we were working with Ben Wolf at Tufts University, who is looking at just this idea: is how do we taste, experience, and what is the fermentation activity from a carrot grown in a conventional setting, grown in an organic setting, and then grown in a setting where it's beyond organic, where the rotation, soil health, fertility is concentrated in such a way that you get that jaw-dropping flavor. And it turns out that the soil microbial activity that comes into our kitchen is key for the quality of fermentation. And by the way, the quality of flavor. So this is an exciting connection that has been relatively unexplored. And I'm really excited to look into it as we move on into the future.
Yeah, I mean, this whole, there's always been kind of a folk wisdom that, organic is better, but now, we're into this regenerative organic agriculture is sort of the ultimate way of not just, maximizing the health of the plant, but also the planet and the
Yes, and ourselves. It's one big subject, which is what you're saying. These are not separate subjects. And
yeah,
why
no, these
I
are not, yeah.
and why I believe in the evangelism of flavor is because that actually is the connector. And it's a nice one for a food culture, especially a millennial food culture that is emerging, that is driven for pleasure, because it turns out to be a lot more contagious than a
Yeah.
food culture that's being dictated from people like you and me.
Yeah, yeah. Now, people from all over the world come to your restaurants. Unfortunately, I planned it before the COVID pandemic,
Sorry.
but never made. We'll have to wait a few more months, hopefully. Um, do you see yourself as a game changer? Are these people that come to you, are they already convinced of what we're talking about, or do you think you actually change minds? And
I mean, I think most people who come to the restaurant come for the pleasure principle. I mean, that's why we go out to eat, the community of eating and the pleasure of eating good food. A lot of these issues are on the unconscious, and that's okay. I mean, I sort of believe that if you just become educated about how food tastes, you go a long way and take pleasure in it, and do some cooking at home, by the way, because if you're cooking yourself, you're doing something that is leaps and bounds ahead of allowing other people to cook for you, because generally it's less good and less beneficial to the environment. So cooking is a big one, conscious is a big one, but it's really pleasure. I believe that the movement around good food, and the reason that it's continued to grow is because it's rooted in hedonism. And that is something you can bemoan all you want about the American food culture and our lack of appreciation for good food. But one thing that we have more than anyone else is a culture that is greedy for pleasure and willing to go out of their way for it, willing to spend a little bit more money. And that's where I think this movement will continue to get legs.
Yeah, no, hopefully it will. So, I mean, one obstacle obviously is the massive power of the agricultural industrial complex that has been pushing things onto us. And again, an example of interconnectedness, the medical and the pharmaceutical industrial complex are benefiting from this process.
Well, you got to fix that. You got to bring that to light.
Yeah. Well, this is the reason that I now, at this stage of my career, I'm more interested in writing these books and giving talks to audiences that can actually influence it and change it, rather than, just talking to a few scientists who sort of, are on the same wavelength. So, yeah, this is exactly the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing, and I've been amazed since my last book how much that has gone in that direction. So, but do you think that given the way our society is set up, do you think there's a chance for somebody like you and a few other like-minded people, like Yvonne Junard, who's obviously playing a big role in this shifting of consciousness around the environment and around food? Do you think there's a realistic chance that this will actually happen in a large scale, or do you think this is always going to be something that the elites on the East and West Coasts love, but nobody else?
I do, because 12 weeks ago, that was where this country was headed, into a food future where people were turning their backs on processed food. People were ignoring food without a story. Organic was continuing to grow at 10% unbelievably over these many, many, many years. And food was taking a kind of prominence and precedence that we've never seen in a generation. The really unfortunate part of COVID, among all the unfortunates, is that that's put a stop to that energy. And as you know, processed food is taken over in a way that is really extraordinary. $15 billion has been spent in processed food between March and May. That's about a 45% increase from last year. And that's people in their homes turning to processed food for comfort, for convenience. And what scares me is that the gains that have been made in this last 10 to 20 years that have been so profound, we're going to lose ground. And I would like to go back to 12 weeks ago when the winds were at the back of a food culture that was appreciating food from the right kind of farming, and appreciating a food culture that valued taste. And I was, high on that right before COVID. In this moment, I'm a little bit down, but we'll get there. One way to get there, by the way, and you would know this is better than anyone, is that the story of COVID is really about nutrition in the end. I mean, you look at the underlying conditions that are 90+% of these COVID cases, and it's obesity, diabetes, and some type of heart-related disease that is diet-related. So diet and disease and prevention are, again, one and the same subject, and that you can say that, but when you come out of a time with America where 110,000 people have been lost to this disease, and you can think that there is a natural vaccine that isn't foolproof, but is very strong, and that's not available to a lot of Americans, and a lot of Americans aren't conscious about what a cheap food system really gives you. I think some profound changes will come out of this. I'm hoping for that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, this sort of connection, and it's something I actually wrote a chapter about this in my book I'm working on, about this link, of COVID with our chronic diseases, which are mostly related to bad diet. Yeah. One last question. I mean, hopefully we'll have a chance at some future point to do this face to face. But one last question: of the many dishes that you've made, is there one that you would consider your favorite dish?
That's like picking your children. I can't. I can't.
You can't do it.
No, I don't have a favorite dish. We don't even have a menu. We serve, we serve dishes to tables, and we riff on things that are coming in off the farm all day. I'm more and more convinced that the microbial activity that we apply to food is the future of really good and delicious and nutritious food. And again, the equitableness of that is more apparent to me than ever. So that's what I'm going to dig into as we circle out of this.
Okay, great. Well,
thanks,
thanks, Dan.
very much. Pleasure talking to you. I look forward to meeting you.
Okay, same here. Take care.
Thank you, Doctor.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.